Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see you all online today. Just a quick call out, we are recording today. You have the ability to put your camera on if you want. Happy for people to leave them off. That's your personal preference. I'll begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the many lands that we're joining from today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders joining us here today as well. So welcome everyone to this month's webinar. I'm Toby Hedgeland. I'm one of the ag scientists here at AgriProve. In my day-to-day, I look after our business growth team and project delivery. I'm joined by a familiar face to many of you, Kieren, Whittock, our National Operations Manager. We've got quite an action-packed agenda to get through on what can be a pretty confusing topic. What can you do with ACCUs when you generate some? And Kieren and I are going to try and demystify that as we go through today. If you've got any questions, I think you can see the Q&A button sort of up there somewhere in the header on your window. Pop any questions in as we go. I'll try and tackle those, or Kieren will try and tackle those. And we'll also take any questions at the end. We've got 90 minutes booked out. We certainly won't take up 90 minutes of your day. We'll probably be all done in sort of 35 or 40 minutes, depending on how many questions we get at the end. Let's jump into it. A little bit about AgriProve to get us going for anyone new to AgriProve. So our goal is to mainstream a farmer-led commercial model of soil carbon farming, turning farming operations from a source of carbon into a sink for carbon, and to operationalise the 2021 soil carbon methodology to generate high integrity ACCUs or carbon credits. I'll use those two terms interchangeably today, but if I'm talking about ACCUs, I'm talking about carbon credits. And the production of those carbon credits is a core validation of the farm management practices that we all undertake, and they boost soil carbon and they help us with our climate resilience as well. Also, a really key point and why we're here today is to help and support our Australian producers navigate the carbon credit space. Today we're going to take a timely look at what producers can do with ACCUs. ACCUs are starting to be generated pretty broadly across our AgriProve portfolio, with a lot of our producers hitting that second and third anniversary when they start to turn off some ACCUs. But I'm not here just for those producers that have ACCUs today. This is a great learning for anyone who's considering whether a soil carbon project might be good for your operation. And so hopefully you'll leave today with a better understanding around the topic. I'm going to do a quick recap of the AgriProve portfolio, and then we'll get into talking about some ACCU stuff. All right, very brief update just on the AgriProve business. This is our portfolio, still growing at quite a rate of knots, with landholders joining us all the time. Our projects span all the way from North Queensland all the way down predominantly on the eastern seaboard into Victoria, some in Tassie, across into South Australia, and also that corner of southwest WA as well. We've got a bit of a split in the portfolio, about 2/3 graziers or pastoralists, and about 1/3 cropping country as well. And just talking about our sort of national distribution, where we've been at late, you would have seen Mel on one of our earlier webinars. She and the field crews were attending a field day at one of our cropping enterprises earlier in the month in Birchip in northwest Victoria. And we saw some really visible crop growth outcomes from the use of biologicals at the trial underway on that farm. And then next month, the 17th of September, the team will be at another soil carbon project landholders property in Banana in central Queensland as part of our joint MLA producer demonstration sites. And there'll be a field day there, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. To date, we've seen about 60 of our projects have measured increases, hence this flow of ACCUs, and we're busily going through the process of crediting out these ACCUs to these customers. And notably, AgriProve was lucky enough to be the first soil carbon developer to actually generate some ACCUs. Let's get into it then. So in our June webinar, Kieren took us through an overview of what's involved in running a soil carbon project, and I've included this condensed slide from that presentation to help us frame what we're focusing on being crediting, that extreme right tablet I've got on the page there. Today we're going to assume we've registered our project, we've had it baseline sampled, we've done our implementation activities, some management on our farm that's going to help us to sequester some carbon. We've done some measurement and we're ready to credit. So I think a great place for us to start is for us to look at measurement. And I'm going to hand over to Kieren now, who's going to give us a little bit of an insight on measurement. Now, I've just got a few chats coming through. I'm just going to check them. I've got someone who can't see the presentation. I'll just wait to see if anyone else wants to let me know that they can't see. I think I'll ask my guys. Daniel, you can see it okay? All good. Thanks, Harrison. That's terrific. Okay, that's great. Thanks for that confirmation, guys. Kieren, over to you to give us a bit of a recap on measuring and why we measure.
Great, thanks, Toby. And for those of you who did join us in June, this is a bit of a rehash of what we went through at the time, but always good to have that refresher. So the key point here is that we do monitor all our projects using satellite-derived indicators and remote soil organic carbon models to try to kind of track lead indicators for that sequestration of carbon in soil. So we put all of our projects across the portfolio through this annual review process to look at these lead indicators, which allows us to determine whether we feel there is the potential to go out, do the physical sampling and measure an increase in soil organic carbon stocks. So if these indicators are positive, we'll mobilise our field teams, send them out, we'll redo that measurement round, and that measurement round's done exactly the same way as we do that baseline sampling round. All the samples go up to the laboratory for analysis. And then we do the calculations to calculate the change in that carbon stock between your baseline sampling round and that subsequent sampling round. So this sampling can occur as soon as 12 months after your baseline sampling round, but we do have an obligation under the regulations that we do resample all of our projects at least once every 5 years. But through use of these remote models, through this annual review process, it means that we're not waiting 5 years potentially to sample these projects if those indicators are good. We'll go and sample at a higher cadence, really with a view to getting that ACCU flow on these projects through quicker, provided that implementation of the eligible activities for building that carbon in soil have taken place throughout that project period. Also important to call out there too that under our model, all those subsequent sampling costs are covered under AgriProve's fee. So there's no additional cost in terms of that higher cadence of sampling throughout the project life cycle. So all going well, we go out, we do that resampling, we measure that increase in the soil organic carbon stocks. It's really what's termed the creditable sequestration in the diagram on this slide. So once we've got that increase, we do a series of validations at our end to make sure we're confident that we've measured that increase. And then that basically allows us then to proceed into the offsets reporting and crediting process. So a few key call outs there in terms of how that works. So just to explain what that diagram on the right-hand side of this slide is showing, if we come back after 12 months, we measure that creditable sequestration, all good, we proceed, we go through the reporting and crediting process, have credits issued to that project. Then if we come back in another 12 months, so at year 2, and the carbon stocks have actually dipped below what they were in that previous year, all that means at that point in time is that we don't report on that project, we don't apply for credits at that point in time. There's no requirement for anything to be relinquished at that stage. And then as per this diagram, if we then come back again in the following year, resample, and we measure an increase in that stock again, and that increase in that stock is above that previous high watermark, that's when we can go back and apply for credits once again. So it really works on this high watermark concept in terms of always making sure that we're getting those carbon stocks above that previous high point before we go ahead and apply for credits for an individual project. So that's a really brief summary of how that measurement process works, and I'll just hand back to Toby.
Very good. Thanks, Kieren. Jeff, I can grab your question there. I can see in the chat. AgriProve doesn't do savanna burning as a credit generation methodology. We just do soil carbon projects. All right. Where do ACCUs come from? So I think we can understand the premise there around additionality, getting above that high watermark or getting a measured increase, and that's our first gateway to crediting. And unfortunately, there isn't a stalk that drops ACCUs off in the front paddock, and we need to have a bit of dedication to our management to actually sequester some soil carbon to achieve those measured increases. The good thing is, though, that much of what we need is actually at our disposal and free of charge, and I'll talk about the science in a moment. But one thing, as much as there isn't a stalk dropping off ACCUs on our front door, there is a bit of a common misconception about a landholder meaning that you have carbon credits. And so, yes, you can sequester carbon in your soil without having a project, but it won't be recognised to actually generate and accumulate ACCUs or any other type of carbon credit, like any other method that Jeff just asked about in the chat there. That was a good prompt, Jeff. You must have a registered project on your property. So just a really important call out there. You could have an environmental planting, or you could do savanna burning or whatever, but you're not actually generating and accumulating ACCUs unless the measurement is in place and a project is registered with the Clean Energy Regulator. So just by having a property doesn't mean that you have carbon credits. So just a point of clarification, that's pretty much step one. To get some credits, we need to have a registered project in place and to have that measurement underway. Alrighty, so to return to the science behind sequestration, carbon sequestration is very much driven by photosynthesis, which cycles carbon from the atmosphere into the soil. And we can think of our plants as tiny little solar-powered carbon pumps. It's equally applicable to our cropping species and our pasture species, or all plants. And all plants take carbon from the atmosphere, and they use that carbon to build their physical structures through growth. And they also produce carbohydrates or sugars, which are exuded into the soil. And if you've been looking at soil carbon a little bit, you'd often hear us talk about exudates. That's what we're talking about. And exudates are pretty important in this whole cycle. They're the liquid carbon pathway. So these exudates, they feed the soil microbiome, and they help it to prosper. And what really happens is that in return for exudates, we see our microbes. They take that's a bit of energy for them, and they're the ones that unlock some of the nutrients and make it available to plants. They do other things as well, but it's one of the key things they do. And we see a similar exchange with mycorrhizal fungi. You might have heard about that as well. And the fungi is great for water being exchanged for those carbohydrates or sugars as well, so helping with available water. So we have an increase in carbon created by those exudates being pushed by the roots into the soil. We have an increase in that microfauna, so our bacteria, fungi, that could be dead or decaying as well, which is great for our plants. And it's this subsoil activity which really does the heavy lifting of sequestration. The sequestration we see in that subsoil is 5 to 30 times what we see from that above ground trash or litter, that decomposition that we see above ground. That's a really brief summary around the cycle there. There's loads of heaps of resources online, and you can have a look at that kind of stuff. But that's our contribution there. And really our goal is that we're cycling and we're leaving a little bit more carbon in the soil each time we go through, and taking a little bit less out. Just to comment briefly on some of the other benefits of soil carbon as well. Carbon is great for soil structure. What carbon does is it helps to aggregate soil particles, give it structure, help it to bind. This is great for physical degradation, so erosion and that kind of stuff. Inversely to holding soil together, the way that carbon, the molecule is structured, it's a bit of a spiral, and it helps to help create some spaces in the soil as well, which creates tiny pores where water can hang out as well. So we see our increased water holding capacity as well. So pretty magical stuff, giving us nutrients, helping us with our structure, and also helping with available water capacity for our plants. It's really key for our plants. All right, to tie that bit of science back to ACCUs, ACCUs really are the results. So our carbon credits are the result of that sequestration, accounting for any emissions created through our farm management activities, be they diesel use or maybe our livestock or anything else which contributes to our emissions profile, and any discounts that might be applied by the Clean Energy Regulator as they go through their calculations to give us our credits. Okay, so let's imagine that we've done some great farm management. We've got everything pumping along pretty well. The AgriProve team have come and they've done that validated measured increase that Kieren showed us earlier. Kieren, what happens next?
Yeah, thanks, Toby. So once we do have that validated measured increase on a specific project, as I mentioned before, that really kicks off the process of offsets reporting and ultimately lodging that crediting application to the Clean Energy Regulator. So in order to do that, there's actually quite a few steps that we need to go through. And the key call out here is that this is a process that AgriProve really manages end to end. So we do a lot of work to really try to distill the complexity in this process and make that as simple and easy as possible for all of our partner landholders. So really, probably the first key piece of information that we do need to acquire throughout this process is information regarding the actual implementation of those eligible carbon building activities on the farm during that project period. So that's the period since your project was baseline up until that subsequent sampling round. So for example, if your eligible activity is altering stocking rates, it might be information regarding, have you increased your paddock count? If your activity relates to pasture renovation or pasture rejuvenation, it might be what areas have you renovated, what areas have you rejuvenated through seeding activities. So getting an idea of what's actually happened on the land over that period is really important to showing that those eligible activities have been implemented. But this is also important to allow us to quantify the emissions associated with the project for that project period. So things like the stocking rates, the rates of application of fertilizers are really important for us to be able to quantify those emissions. The reason we need that emissions information is we have to calculate something that's called net abatement. So that net abatement is essentially the sequestration of the carbon in the soil minus any emissions associated with the project for that reporting period. It's really important to note there, though, that in terms of quantifying those emissions, it is relative to the baseline period for the project. So that baseline period is the 5 years, in simple terms, essentially the 5 years leading up to the establishment of your project. So provided you haven't significantly increased those emissions in your project period, any deductions against your sequestration of the carbon in soil at that point in time would be minimal. So if you've massively increased stocking rates, something like that, then there may be some deductions, but if it is only a small change relative to that baseline period, then yeah, there's limited deduction on that sequestered carbon in the soil. So it's really important too that this is really valuable process in understanding that whole emissions profile for your individual operation as well outside of the carbon project. Calculating that net abatement, it actually involves more than 85 individual calculations. So we've done a lot of work at our end to really streamline that process, make that as efficient as possible at our end. So it really is just plug the numbers in and get that result. And again, taking away that complexity from all of our partner landholders. Really, then it's a document compilation exercise. We do have to provide a lot of information both to auditors and regulators throughout this process. So our document stack that goes to the audit team, and I'll come to that in a second, generally runs in the order of 100 to 200 individual files that we have to provide at this point in time for them to do all their checks that they need to do regarding the integrity of the activities that have been taking place and showing that we've complied with all the regulation. So again, complexity that we're managing, ensuring that it's as simple and easy as possible for you. All our projects do have to go through a third-party independent reasonable assurance audit at their first offsets report. So if it is your first time going through to accrediting application, we do have to engage this third-party independent audit. Again, a process we manage, but what this does mean is that there will be a site visit. So an AgriProve representative and one of the audit team will come out, visit you on farm, and really that visit's just to tick off some boxes for the auditor's perspective in terms of the way we've structured the project, in terms of where the sample points have been taken, where the boundaries are, but also to have a conversation with you regarding those eligible activities, what you've implemented, where you've implemented it. These visits usually last somewhere between 2 and 3 hours, and really they're conducted in a very conversational manner. So usually it'll be just a drive around the farm, have a conversation with the auditor. They'll look at what they need to look at, and all done in a couple of hours. So again, we do a lot of work to try to manage that process and make that audit site visit go as smoothly as possible. Once the auditor is satisfied, we get a report from them that states that they're happy that we've complied with all the relevant regulation. Once we get that audit report, again, it's another document compilation exercise. We lodge the crediting application with the Clean Energy Regulator. So this is where we actually provide a number to the regulator saying this is the number of Australian carbon credit units that we're applying for, provide all that supporting documentation, and then the regulator does their assessment. The Clean Energy Regulator mandate a 90-day assessment time. So once we've got that crediting application lodged, it can take up to 90 days for that assessment to take place, potentially more if they have to come back to us and ask additional questions. So we try to make sure the quality of the information we're providing is top-notch right from the start, so that we reduce the number of questions that the regulator have to come back and ask us at that point in time. So again, we manage that relationship. We manage the questions that come back from the regulator and make sure that we're responding to those in a timely manner. So all going well, we get through the audit, we lodge that crediting application, regulator does their assessment. They then issue their statement of abatement, which basically says that the regulator has awarded those ACCUs to that project. And once those ACCUs are issued, the 75% of those ACCUs that go to our landholders at that point in time, there's optionality in terms of how they're dealt with. So at that point, I might pass it back to Toby, let him run through some scenarios as to what might happen once those credits have actually been issued to the project.
Perfect. Thanks, Kieren. Look, I'm certainly glad that your team look after that. And I mean, just to placate anyone who's feeling a bit nervous after all of that work that the AgriProve team do, really it's just keeping some good farm records, and Kieren's team will take care of the rest very much. So look, let's assume Kieren's team have done all that work and we've been issued some ACCUs, a beautiful little certificate there on the leftmost of my diagram. What am I going to do now? So ACCUs can be held in an account, much the same as you'd hold shares in a share trading account. And that account, it's called a register, and that's called the Australian National Register of Emissions Units. It's administered by the Clean Energy Regulator, so government-backed, very safe, very secure. And you can think of those ACCUs, I've put it as a safe. It's like hay in the shed or grain in a silo or maybe some lambs in a paddock. It's a real asset. They're a real thing. It's money in the bank, and they'll sit there in your ANREU account. You don't need to do anything with them. They can just sit there as a savings vehicle. Maybe you think it's going to be a dry year next year or some other rainy day policy. You might think the price is going to go up, or whatever your future aspiration is. Those ACCUs don't expire. If you don't want to sit on them and you want to monetize them, you absolutely can. That's your choice. There are basically two key pathways. So what can we do? If we take the upper limb of the diagram there, we could sell them or trade them to an emitter, and they will use them to offset their emissions, and that's generally called offsetting. So selling them. The lower branch there is that we could inset them into our own operations, essentially sell them to ourselves, but we already own them, so we don't have to do a sales transaction, and we use them to offset our own emissions. So it's essentially abating our own emissions, like Kieren was talking about earlier. Either way, it all boils down to the very rightmost little image there about retirement, and that's not us being able to knock off at the end of the day. This is the accounting process, which actually is the use of an ACCU. So holding an ACCU doesn't actually constitute it being used. To actually offset an emission, they need to be retired. So that's how we offset emissions. Think of it like a bill. For example, we might have 100 tonnes of emissions produced on our property. We've got a bill of 100 tonnes, then we would need to pay it off with 100 tonnes of ACCUs. They would be retired. Those ACCUs are now gone. They've been used. So if I tie it back to my grain in the silo, essentially I've hand fed out that grain. That grain is now gone. It's used. That asset has been consumed. That's a really simple overview of sort of the major pathways around the use of ACCUs and opportunities for you to use them or hold them at your discretion. I've got a couple of scenarios now to sort of try and bring it back onto farm. That's great, Toby, but how might I use them in a more practical sense? I've got 3 examples that we'll go through slowly. They're pretty simple, but hopefully, like I said at the start, they give you an idea around the principles and how you can apply them if you generate some carbon credits. So the first example is we could sell them for some income. An old McDonald has a farm, let's say he's got 1,000 hectares, and he commences a project in 2022, and his baseline sampling costs are $35,000. If we fast forward 2 years, and we're now in 2024, he goes through the accrediting process and he's credited 2,000 ACCUs. At that time, a buyer offers him $35 an ACCU, and he says, look, that's great. I'd love to sell some. So he chooses to sell 1,000 ACCUs. And why would he sell 1,000 ACCUs? Well, if we do that quick maths I've got written there, if he sells 1,000 at $35 each, that's $35,000, which is initially, that covers his initial investment in his second year of his baseline sampling costs. So he can cover his costs in year 2, and he's still got 1,000 left over, and they'll just be in his ANREU account for another use that he might like to do at another time. I've got a little asterisk on the $35,000 there. Just like share trading, selling any commodity, brokerage will apply. It's a small amount. I've just got that there for transparency. So what happens with the sale? Well, the sale is actually the transfer of ownership. So those ACCUs are transferred from old McDonald's ANREU account into the purchaser's ANREU account. So they've now got 1,000 ACCUs in their ANREU account. That purchaser happens to be an emitter, and they've got some 2030 or 2050 emissions targets they're trying to hit, and they want to retire those. They want to offset those emissions. So they go through the retirement process, and those ACCUs are then used by that emitter, and that completes the cycle there. So a simple example of how you can sell your ACCUs to cover cost. In this example, we've used them to cover our baseline costs, but we might want to invest them into some water infrastructure, some wire infrastructure. We might want to go on a holiday or buy a new tractor. Again, at your discretion, but monetizing the benefit of ACCUs. Example 2, a little bit more complicated here. We can forward sell ACCUs as well. And one of the options that AgriProve offers is the ability to defer your baseline sampling payment via the forward sale of the ACCUs that you'll generate in the future. So in this scenario, Jack and Jill, they start a carbon project in 2023. And at the point that they start, they choose to pay for their baselining with a future payment of 2,800 ACCUs over 5 years. And 5 years is the standard deferral period offered by AgriProve. Why are they doing a forward sale? Well, Jack and Jill don't want to use their current cash flow to pay for the baseline sampling, and that's why they're going to use the ACCUs. They might need to use that cash flow to buy something on farm, or they just don't have the capacity to do it at the moment. Doesn't stop them from starting a project. They can carry on. We roll forward our clock 2 years again, and we hit 2025, and Jack and Jill accredited 500 ACCUs, and these ACCUs, they're actually retained by AgriProve as part payment against that initial 2,800. Roll forward another 3 years, we're at the 5th year in our 5-year deferral payment. They go through a crediting round in 2028. This time they're credited 3,000 ACCUs, and the outstanding 2,300 ACCUs are retained as the final payment against that 2,800 by AgriProve. And Jack and Jill, they'll get to keep the 700 that's over in their ANREU account. So what we see is that transfer over a 5-year period to AgriProve, where AgriProve retains 2,800 ACCUs on that first in, first out basis from each crediting round. And that is how we recover the cost of baseline sampling. Transfer 2 is it's the complicated piece here. To avail that financing to Jack and Jill up front, AgriProve also takes a commercial forward contract and has a forward sale with a major emitter or someone like that. And we actually transfer those 2,800 to fulfill our own forward contract to that emitter. That emitter gets them into their ANREU account, and similar to our prior example, being an emitter, that end user, that owner of the forward contract, they retire those ACCUs against to offset some of their emissions, and those ACCUs are consumed. A little bit more complicated, but that goes through one of the great options that we offer around deferring your baseline costs over that period, and then you've got your following 20 years to generate ACCUs at no cost or no additional cost. The third one, building, we'll get on to Karen's question at the end. Thanks, Karen. Example 3, insetting ACCUs, more complicated. The Pepin family, they run a fine wool merino operation and want to sell their clip from this year, 50 bales or 10,000 kilos, 10 tonnes of wool as carbon neutral. So what they do is they engage a consultant at a cost of about $12,500 to conduct a life cycle assessment. And that life cycle assessment assesses the production emissions on that wool, and that will give us our emissions intensity that we need to offset to achieve carbon neutrality, and they'll also handle our certification process as well. So the first step is emissions. So we've gone through that life cycle assessment, and we understand that our production emissions are 15 kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilo of wool produced on farm. Let's assume that in this year, 2024, they've gone through a crediting round, they've been issued 5,000 ACCUs. So we need to get into our insetting now. So we're in our insetting realm. To create this carbon neutral wool, they're going to need to offset those calculated production emissions. We've got 10,000 kilos of wool, and we've got a production emissions of 15 kilos of CO2 per kilo. Combine those together, and we've actually got 150,000 kilograms of emissions we need to offset, which is 150 tonnes, and conveniently, tonnes of CO2 equivalent is actually ACCUs, so they need to offset with 150 ACCUs. They go about their insetting transaction by retiring those 150 ACCUs, and that completes our neutrality. They retain 4,850 in their ANREU account for future use. They've still got all of those, and that has settled everything. To sum up their cost benefit analysis or their return on investment here, the Pepin family have invested 12.5 grand and the value of 150 ACCUs there. The value is whatever they were able to achieve if they were to sell them. I haven't priced them, but they would need to then cover or achieve a premium price or a price premium, sorry, of 125 cents a kilo, plus the equivalent cost of those ACCUs to break even on their investment there. So a little bit more complicated, but it shows you the benefit of insetting and some of the third-party engagements that you need to go through if you want to produce a carbon neutral product on farm. All right, I'm going to round out with a couple of key points, and then we'll get on to those questions, which I can see that a couple coming through in the chat. So holding ACCUs. If we've generated some ACCUs, we're going to hold them in an ANREU account administered by the Clean Energy Regulator. They're yours. What you do with them is totally at your discretion. And as I've said a few times through here, holding ACCUs doesn't create a certification. It doesn't create a status, and doesn't create carbon neutrality. We need to go through some steps to achieve those sort of things. It's just money in the bank for you and for your future purpose. If I'm going to sell some ACCUs, the sale is the transfer of ownership. and it doesn't constitute the use of an ACCU. I can transfer an ACCU without it being used, and you would have sort of seen that come through in the examples there as well. There are many ways that we can actually trade ACCUs. They can be sold privately, they can be sold publicly, and as we saw in that second example, we can actually do forward sales as well. There are other ways, I haven't listed them all as well. Retirement. Retirement is the use of an ACCU, and that requires for it to be struck off the ledger. That's when we use it to offset emissions, and it no longer exists. It's normally certified by a third party and accompanied by certification of retirement. And that retirement is the key piece that we'd need to do to achieve our neutrality. All right, that pretty much concludes the discussion today. I'm going to flip over to our FAQ screen. And I'm going to go through these, and I'm going to give Kieren a chance to have a look at the FAQs. I've had a quick ponder of those as well, while I just go through these couple of FAQs. Question we often get: if I'm going to achieve carbon neutrality, how long does it last? If I've achieved it, is it forever? No. Hopefully you're getting a bit of a gist here that a lot of this carbon credits is a form of accounting, and carbon neutrality certainly is. You need to be matching your emissions with ACCUs or other offsets to maintain that neutrality every year. So it's an ongoing obligation if you want to maintain your neutrality. Maybe I'm going to answer, I'm not going to quite get Mike's one with this, but we'll half answer it here. Am I guaranteed to earn ACCUs? No, you're not always going to earn ACCUs. It's like any sort of crop or any sort of production system. You would have seen in Kieren's measurement. Sometimes we do have years where you get a reversal and you come back out. Management plays a really key role in our sequestration, as does the climate, rainfall, and your farming operation at the time. Also, different farming systems and soil types and climates have different potentials. Lower rainfall, poorer soil types, harder to sequester carbon. You can certainly do it. It's just a slower rate. And this concept is true across where you are at your life cycle as well. So if you've been farming in a way that has a high potential to sequester carbon for a long time, you might have already sequestered a lot of carbon into your soil. The rate of sequestration does slow. It can go on for a long, long way, but your ability to sequester at a fast rate does slow as well. So your potential or your rate of change does change over time. Those are two quick questions here. All right, Mike, thank you for your question. I see I've got some in the Q&A as well. I haven't looked at the Q&A, but I'll start with Mike's here as well. What happens if you don't generate any ACCUs for the project in, say, year 5 or 10 or 25 years? So Kieren, I don't know if you want to tackle the first one about what happens if you don't generate ACCUs in year 5. There are a couple of options that you can take on your project there.
Yeah, thanks, Toby, and thanks, Mike, for that question. Probably the key thing to point out there is that year 5 is really probably the key decision point here. The reason is, as I mentioned previously, we are required to report to the regulator at least once every 5 years. So what that actually means in practice is that even if we get to year 5, we do a sampling round and we haven't measured an increase in those carbon stocks relative to your baseline stock, we're still obligated under the regulation to report to the regulator, and that means that we do actually have to go through the initial audit process with the third-party auditors. So at that point in time, there are costs incurred against the project for kind of no return in terms of ACCUs at year 5. So really, it would be a conversation between us and our partner landholder at that point in time in terms of whether we feel it's worthwhile continuing the project at that point in time, and whether we think there's the likelihood of success post year 5, and whether it's worth going through that audit process and continuing the project. So there's probably 2 pathways there in terms of, yes, we agree to continue, do that audit for no ACCU claim, or we decide that, okay, there's no reasonable pathway to kind of continue this project from this point, at which point we terminate our agreements and revoke the project, and there's no kind of ongoing encumbrance at that point in time. So yeah, so really year 5, probably the key decision point there. I think it's unlikely that we would see projects go, particularly through to year 25, without having generated ACCUs. We would have made that decision long before in almost all cases, I suspect. Thanks, Toby.
No worries. Leonie, I'll tackle your question. For ACCUs to be sold, who they get sold through, because AgriProve have a 25% investment in them too. So just to clarify that, yes, AgriProve does have that 25% success fee. So if you're credited, it's a, what do we call it? A no success, no payment to AgriProve. So we only get paid when you generate ACCUs. It's in our best interest for everybody to be out there generating ACCUs. We go through that process that Kieren went through. The crediting occurs, and we do a 75-25 split. They're put into the 2 different ANREU accounts. 25% are retained by AgriProve as their ongoing success fee, and 75% are yours. So those are in your ANREU account, Leonie. You can do whatever you want with them. You can organise a sale privately, publicly, and go through some of those mechanisms around those. That's your choice. I don't know, Kieren, if you want to add anything on that one. No? Very good. I had another question as well. I'm going to give the simple answer to Karen. Thank you for your question, Karen. What happens to ACCUs if you sell the property? So ACCUs are separate to your property. Like the grain example that I gave earlier, I've harvested the grain, I'll put it in my silo. The ACCUs are in your ANREU account. They are separate. There are some deeper legal issues. We'll have a technical fact sheet on this, but the simple answer is the ACCUs are yours. They're in your ANREU account. If you sell the property, they're 2 different things. Have a look at the Q&A as well. All right. Kieren, are you looking at the Q&A as well? I'll give you a second to look at those. All right. There's a couple of good ones here for you, Kieren. I can answer them, but you're probably the expert. Andrew's asked, does the government take a percent? So I don't know if you want to talk about the discounts just at a high level on what the government holds back at crediting rounds.
Yeah, sure, Toby. So in terms of discounts from the Clean Energy Regulator, it really boils down to the fact that we run 25-year projects as standard under AgriProve, and there's really 2 key discounts that we're dealing with. There's a permanence discount and a risk of reversal discount, and essentially that boils down to 25% at each crediting round applied to those ACCU issuances, and that's really just buffers that the government takes to buffer against losses in carbon stocks going forward, in essence.
Very good. Thanks, Kieren. Andrew, I can grab your other one as well. What rate does baselining get paid at? I think you're asking the cost of the initial baselining soil sampling. I'd recommend you jump on and get yourself a carbon ready report from AgriProve. That'll give you an exact cost or a very, very close estimate on the baselining cost for your property based on the hectares. And I'll come on to that in a minute. Kieren, are ACCUs freely tradable or sold through a specific broker? Multitude of options at the moment. Yeah, lots of options there. Go back to the chat. Sorry, jumping between the chat and the Q&A. I think, Mike, we might have covered off the costs incurred by AgriProve if the project is terminated after 5 years. We incur all of those costs, or all you're required to pay for the baseline costs. Am I correct on that one, Kieren? Yeah.
Yeah, correct, Toby. Provided the baselining costs are dealt with, that's all basically wound up in our success fee. The fact that we're only successful if our partner landholders are successful.
Yeah. Bruce, good question. What is the price of ACCUs? There is a spot price. You can get that at ACCUs.com. I might get Daniel to put the link in the chat when he's got a second, so you can look that up. I think it's somewhere between $34 and $35 at the minute. So, yeah, I've got the thumbs up from Daniel on that one. Jump back to the Q&A. I think I've got another one coming there as well. Lynette, will AgriProve assist in marketing the ACCUs achieved by their clients who wish to sell? Yes, Lynette, we certainly have helped some of our landholders to connect in the selling. And do we have a spreadsheet for growers as a quick guide? I'll get the guys to reach out to you, Andrew. I've got your email address. That's no problem. So we can help you out with that. That's pretty easy. All right. Daniel's put that in. Got another question just popping in. This is great. Thanks, everyone. All right. Kenneth, this is a good one for you, Kieren. Can ACCUs be generated by revegetating degraded land? This will come into our eligible activities, Kieren.
So I guess short answer to that is yes, but probably not under the soil carbon method. As Toby kind of called out earlier, there are a number of methodologies under the ACCU scheme, some of which are vegetation methodologies such as environmental plantings and things like that. So if that's kind of the context of the question in terms of revegetation through trees, shrubs, things like that, there are other methods outside of soil carbon that do also generate Australian carbon credit units, if that answers the question.
Yeah, and Kenneth, you can reach out to us and we'll put you in touch with our partners that do those other methods as well, if you like. So more than happy to refer you on to the experts for those other methods. All right. In the chat. Karen, in a word, yes, the price has generally trended upwards, but I think have a look at that link and you'll be able to see the movements over the history of the ACCUs as well. All right. I might wrap it there and just move on. Thank you, everyone, for those questions. If you've got more, please do email us. More than happy to answer any of your questions. What next? So to close out, we all know that committing to a soil carbon project is a big decision. And with all big decisions, there's support available to you. And that's what we're here for, to help you on your soil carbon journey. Keep your learning up. Great resources on our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to our fortnightly carbon snapshots newsletter as well. It's a more scientific look and a bit of an industry look at soil carbon that'll keep you informed and help you with your learning. If you're starting to progress thinking about a soil carbon project, do your research and what should you be looking for. Look for proven credit delivery. You might have got a bit of a gist from Kieren there. It's pretty involved. It's very technical. We have a team of engineers that work at AgriProve on this sort of stuff. Make sure that you can trust the organisation you're going with and you're getting quality outcomes, that they're verified, certified, those kind of things. Have a look at your agreements, understand the risk profile around any risk involved. Project proponent is a key one there. Have a look at your cost profile. There are different models around the different methodologies that you can get into, whether they're upfront, ongoing fees for services, success fees. So have a look at the cost profile around who pays for what and when that who pays for whatever they're getting for as well. The final one is also have a look at any restrictions or prescriptions, whether you're required to use any products, advice, software, that kind of stuff. Some of it might be good, or other things, might conflict with your on-farm approaches already as well. At AgriProve, we have an open door policy. We don't prescribe anything, you're free to use your own resources, and we'll support you and guide you through your carbon journey. If you've done all of that, and all of you on the call, thank you for joining. You can assess your potential through our free carbon reader reports. As I mentioned in the FAQs, it's a great way to understand the cost of establishing a soil carbon project, and it gives you a view on the potential of your property to earn those ACCUs over the 25-year lifetime of your project. To wrap up, I said I'd come back to it. Out and about, we'll be out at Gunthorpe Cattle Co. Up in Banana, Central Queensland on the 17th of September. If you want to learn about how grazing management has had great results for Adam on his property there, he's recently awarded ACCUs. Come and have a look at that, and there'll be more information coming in the newsletter, but get your registration. It'd be great to see some of you there if that is close to your neck of the woods. That is it from Kieren and me, everyone at AgriProve. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a great afternoon. Thanks, everyone.